piece of the past. Here, history is not loud, it is a whisper. The candles glow, apartments crinkle, a tale of the past whispered softly to you. This is your sanctuary of soft storytelling, where we wander the quiet corridors of forgotten places. Breathe in the stillness of the centuries and find calm in the echoes of the past. So get cozy, come closer, and let the past whisper to you. Close your eyes and let the candlelight flicker gently on the walls. Tonight we step back in time to the spring of 1819, when a little princess was born who would one day rule over the greatest empire on earth. Her name was Alexandrina Victoria, though to her family she was simply Little Drina. She arrived on May 24th, 1819, in the quiet chambers of Kensington Palace in London. At the time, she was nothing more than a tiny infant, fifth in line to the throne. Few thought she would ever wear the crown. Her father, Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, was already in his 50s when she was born. He was the fourth son of the aging King George III and seemed an unlikely father of Britain's future queen. Her mother, Princess Victoire of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld, was German, widowed once already, and devoted to raising her children with strict care. But fate has a way of weaving its threads quietly, almost secretly. Within a year of Victoria's birth, her father was dead, leaving the little girl to grow up under the watchful eyes of her widowed mother and the calculating gaze of those who began to see her as the heir, England's future. Victoria's birth was celebrated modestly. She was christened in the grand halls of Kensington, given the name Alexandrina in honor of her godfather, Tsar Alexander of Russia, and Victoria after her mother. Few imagined that history would remember her by the Latin name alone. As a baby, she was spirited and bright-eyed. Observers would later say that even in her cradle, she seemed to carry a quiet dignity, the kind of presence that made people take notice. But at this tender age, she was simply her mother's beloved child. Her earliest years were touched by both privilege and fragility. She lived within the stately walls of Kensington Palace, surrounded by servants, governesses, and tutors. Yet she was also vulnerable, fatherless before her first birthday, her future uncertain. Her world was small, filled with nursery rooms and gardens, a world where German was spoken as often as English. Her half-sister, Princess Theodora, became her first playmate, and her mother's ever-present companion, Sir John Conroy, would soon cast a long shadow over her childhood. But in these first years, before schemes and isolation took hold, little Victoria was like any child. She loved her dolls. She clung to her governess, Baroness Letzen, who had become her lifelong friend. And above all, she adored her mother. Duchess of Kent often gazed at her daughter with fierce devotion, whispering that her greatest fear was that she loved the child too much. For in this small, fatherless girl, all her hopes now rested. Outside the palace, the kingdom was restless. George III was old and mad. George IV was indulgent and unpopular. No surviving heirs filled the line of succession. One by one, Victoria's uncles, childless or grieving lost infants, failed to secure the future of the House of Hanover. And so, quietly, without anyone quite realizing it, the crown's destiny was moving closer and closer to the cradle of the little girl at Kensington. Even as a toddler, Victoria's future was already being shaped. She was kept away from her father's side of the family, her life carefully managed by her mother and Conroy. And yet, there were those who saw in her a spark, a strength, a possibility that this small child might one day hold Britain's future in her hand. And so, dear listener, the story begins. A lonely child, cherished by her mother, bound by duty she could not yet understand. Princess, who would grow to become Queen Victoria. The crown was hers, yet the weight of it pressed down heavily. For though Victoria had broken free from her childhood cage, the first years of her reign were marked by solitude. At Kensington, her mother had ruled every corner of her life, but now in Buckingham Palace, the young queen insisted on distance. She no longer shared a bedroom with the Duchess of Kent. The once adoring mother now found herself pushed aside, a figure of mistrust, and Sir John Conroy, man who had schemed to control her for so long, was gone. Victoria would not see him, not hear him, would not forgive him. She had banished his shadow from her presence. Yet with freedom came emptiness. Victoria, barely 18, sat upon a throne vast and cold. She was queen, yes, but also a young woman, still learning, still growing, still longing for companionship. It was then that she leaned upon her Prime Minister, Lord Melbourne. He was witty, experienced, and comforting. To her, he was a father figure she had never truly known. She confided in him, trusted his judgment, and often sought his company for hours on end. The bond between them raised whispers. Some in society feared she'd depended too much on him, that her politics were shaped too closely by his hand. But to Victoria, Melbourne was not only a guide, he was a friend. Still, the throne was lonely. She had no husband, no children, no companions her own age. Court watched her every move. Nobles criticized her independence. Politicians tested her inexperience. The young queen, radiant and determined, also found herself vulnerable. She made mistakes, favoring the Whigs too openly, mishandling court appointments, and angering those who expected more caution. Yet even in her errors, she revealed her will. She would not be a puppet, not to her mother, not to Conroy, not even to her advisors. And so Victoria reigned in those first years, alone, yet unbroken. A queen who had escaped one cage, only to sit upon a throne that was, in its own way, another. The throne was vast, the palace silent, and the crown heavy upon her brow. Yet in these early years, Victoria leaned on one man above all others, her Prime Minister, Lord Melbourne. Melbourne was charming, witty, and kind. To the young queen, he was both mentor and friend, even something of a father figure she had never truly known. She cherished their long conversations, often stretching for hours. In his company, she found warmth, wisdom, and reassurance. But whispers began to stir. Courtiers murmured that she depended too much on him, that her politics were shaped entirely by his counsel. Victoria, still only a girl of 18, could not yet see how closely she was aligning herself with one side of Parliament. She openly favored the Whigs, Melbourne's party. It was a dangerous display, for a queen was expected to stand above the clash of politics. When the Whigs faltered in 1839, the young queen found herself at the center of a storm. The Tories, led by Sir Robert Peel, were called to form a government. Peel requested changes in her household ladies, noble women who were close to her, but also tied to the Whig cause. Victoria resisted fiercely, refusing to dismiss them. She clung to her ladies, but in doing so she appeared partial, political, and defiant. This became known as the bedchamber crisis, a scandal whispered across the realm. The young queen, unbending, facing off against her new Prime Minister. Peel could not accept her refusal, and his ministry collapsed before it even began. It was a bitter lesson. The press was cruel. Caricatures mocked her stubbornness. Critics painted her as a girl queen, ruled by whim rather than wisdom. For the first time, the adoration of her subjects wavered, and yet she learned. Through humiliation, through error, she began to understand the delicate balance of monarchy. The queen must be careful, partial, wise in her affections. So she listened, she observed, she grew. Though young and inexperienced, Victoria's will was strong, and every mistake, every stumble, became a stone upon which she built her reign. The throne was hers, yet her heart was still unclaimed. For all her power, all her authority, Victoria remained a young woman who longed for true companionship. It was in 1836 that fate gently stirred. Her uncle, King Leopold of Belgium, arranged for his nephew, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, to visit Kensington. He was 17 then, quiet and thoughtful, with kind blue eyes and a gentle smile. Victoria was immediately taken with him, writing in her diary of his sweetness and his beauty. But she was still too young, and the world of politics too unsettled. Albert returned to Germany, and the years passed. Victoria became queen, and with the weight of the crown came new trials, yet in her heart, the memory of that young prince lingered. Then, in October 1839, Albert returned to England. Victoria was 20 now, queen grown more confident, yet still young at heart. The moment she saw him again, her feelings deepened. She wrote that he was charming, amiable, and possessed of every quality to make her happy. Only days after his arrival, she acted. For though Albert was the suitor, it was Victoria, as sovereign, who must pose. In her private sitting room at Windsor, she told him of her love and asked for his hand. Albert accepted, his eyes shining with warmth. The young queen had chosen not only a husband, but a partner who would stand beside her through all the years to come. On February 10th, 1840, their wedding was held at the Chapel Royal in St. James's Palace. Victoria, radiant in white satin, with a wreath of orange blossoms in her hair, walked down the aisle to her beloved Albert. Her subjects cheered, her heart overflowed. It was not merely a union of thrones, but a marriage of love. That evening, she wrote in her diary of the happiness she felt, calling him my angel, my dearest, my own. For the first time in her life, Victoria knew not only the crown's burden, but the joy of love, freely chosen. And so destiny had led her from the lonely corridors of Kensington to the arms of her beloved Albert, a queen in name, yes, but now also a wife, a woman, and a soul, forever changed. Marriage had brought Victoria joy, but it also brought change. For with Albert at her side, she was no longer only the determined young queen of her early years. Slowly, gently, she became something more, a partner, a wife, a mother, and a monarch. Transformed, Albert was different from the men of court. He was thoughtful, serious, devoted to duty. Where Victoria was spirited, sometimes impulsive, Albert was steady, deliberate, and disciplined. At first, she struggled to share authority. She had been queen before she was a wife, and her will was strong. But Albert, with patience and quiet resolve, earned her trust. He became not just her consort, but her confidant and advisor. Together they worked as a pair, shaping policies, encouraging reforms, and supporting charities. Albert's interest in science, education, and industry opened new paths for Victoria's reign. His influence brought balance to her fiery nature. In the privacy of their home, their marriage was filled with tenderness. Victoria adored him. In her diary, she wrote endlessly of her love, calling him her precious angel and her all in all. Their bond was deep, their passion real, and their partnership one of the strongest in royal history. Soon the quiet of their home was filled with the laughter and cries of children. In November 1840, just months after their wedding, Victoria gave birth to her first child, Princess Victoria, Princess Royal. The young queen, who had once been so lonely in Kensington, now held her own daughter in her arms. More children followed quickly, 9 in all. Each birth was a test of her strength, each child a new joy and a new challenge. Victoria, who once seemed a girl queen, now began to embody the role of matriarch, her family a reflection of the monarchy itself. But motherhood brought struggles too. After the birth of her first child, she experienced a deep melancholy, what we would now call postpartum depression. In her letters, she confessed her unhappiness and exhaustion, feelings she did not always understand. Albert supported her, but the burden was heavy. Still, she persevered. Her love for her family and her devotion to Albert carried her through. And so the young queen, who once stood alone, now walked with her husband beside her children around her, and her heart forever changed. Victoria was no longer simply a sovereign girl who had taken the throne at 18. She was a wife, a mother, and through love, a queen transformed. The young queen had found love, and her marriage to Albert was filled with devotion. Yet shadows still lingered in these early years of her reign. For even as joy filled her private life, trials awaited her on the throne and within her own heart. Motherhood was not easy for Victoria. After the birth of her children, she often fell into deep melancholy. She wrote her feeling unwell, weary, and distant from happiness. Today, we would call it postpartum depression. In her time, it was little understood. Albert, ever patient, comforted her. She struggled against feelings she could not name. Court life, too, was turbulent. Whispers swirled around her household, scandals both small and great. At times, she was criticized for showing too much favor to her German relatives, at others for being too stubborn, too passionate, too much her own woman in a court that expected submission. The assassination attempts came too. Between 1840 and 1842, Victoria was the target of several attacks. Pistols fired as her carriage passed, shots echoing through the London air. Each time, Albert was by her side, protective and calm. Each time Victoria's courage shone, she refused to be cowed, refused to show fear. Her people admired her resolve, even as the shadows deepened around her. Through it all, she clung to Albert. He became her anchor, her advisor, her dearest companion. Even in this love, there was challenge. For Albert, devoted to reform and duty, sometimes sought more authority than his role as prince consort allowed. Victoria, still fiery and independent, bristled at times, yet their bond held strong, woven of both passion and respect. Thus the young queen walked in both light and shadow, mother and monarch, wife and sovereign, tested by scandal, by melancholy, by danger, yet standing always with Albert at her side. These were the shadows of her youth, shaping her into the queen who would endure for decades to come. Thank you for spending this quiet moment in history with me here at Piece of the Past. If you enjoyed your stay in the candlelight, please subscribe so the next story finds you. Until then, may your nights be calm and your dreams timeless.